Hello there, FFTCG community. I'm Judge Jared, and you're watching the first in what I expect will probably become a series of videos here called F.A.Q Checking. And you might, if you're wondering what that means, fact checking here. What I'm going to be doing today in this video is going over the Opus 26 update to the frequently asked questions on the official FFTCG website. So, just in case you're not aware, some people maybe aren't, there is a section on that on the official webpage where they have frequently asked questions, or FAQs, or facts, or whatever you want to call them. And they update this every single set when there's a new set that comes out with a list of cards on there and with associated rulings about those cards. But the interesting thing here is that they're called FAQs, but they put them up when the set comes out. So like typically around the same time that the full spoilers come out for a set, we get the new update to the facts. And but the thing is, the set hasn't been out yet, and they already have this set of questions that or cards that they're covering theoretical questions about. So really it's less of a frequently asked questions and more of a, here's the cards we think are going to cause problems. And so we're just going to put out there like what we expect to be the frequently asked questions. So it's a little backwards there. It's not so much a, oh dang, we're getting a bunch of questions on this card, we should put something up there. They're not reactive about it. They don't add things later. But whenever there's a new set that comes out, they put out this list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the list for Opus 26 of all their entries, of everything that they decided to put out there that, in their opinion, is stuff that they feel like should be covered or accessible, so that we have those answers available. And I'm going to go over each of those. And in my own personal opinion, there's kind of three categories of these in terms of the severity of how important or how interesting these entries are. And so that's what I've got these three colors down underneath here for, is that as I go over these, you're going to see the card over here to the left, and then you'll see beneath me here the entry itself, what they put into the fact there. And if it's something that was really basic or straightforward in a sort of, I don't know why they felt the need to point this out, or they do this a million times and it's not necessary, then it's going to be a green background down there. So green is like chill, nothing out of the ordinary here, let's just move along. And then my second tier up is yellow. So yellow ones are ones where I think it's worth flagging and talking about what the ruling is there, either because it's something somewhat newish, or maybe it's just something that often gets missed with other cards and similar effects, or just something that, you know, if I was trying to get someone ready for like what potential cards you might see in this new set, and being prepared for the rules rule questions might come up about them. Anything that's in yellow is a, like, you should just, you know, kind of log that one away in your head. And then in the last category, I got the red down here. And if it's a red one, that's a, like, all right, buckle up, pay attention. This is something that's like serious. It's either like a brand new concept that we haven't seen before, and so it's really important that we've gotten this information to clarify how the card is ruled and its interactions, or it's something where I was personally surprised by what the ruling was on it, and like it didn't match up with my understanding of what it would have been, and so I saw the entry and went, oh, it's actually like that, when I would have expected otherwise. Or just something I expect to be a potential problem that people might not realize or not pay enough attention to, and it's just we want to make sure that we're, you know, resolving everything correctly. So 3 different tiers there, green, yellow, and red, in terms of how interesting or serious the ruling is overall. Now there's 38 of these in the Opus 26 facts, so 38 cards to cover, but a bunch of these are going to be those green ones where we just kind of lightly talk about it and then move along. And then I'll go more in depth on the other ones. But we'll be going through these in mostly in card number order, with the exception of LBs will get kind of lumped in with their element. But yeah, basically going in order here. So let's do some fact checking. We're going to start off with Clive, good old Clive. So he's got two entries here. And the first one says, if multiple job icon cards that you owned have been removed from the game, Clive acquires all the special abilities that they possess. Now, this is not the reason I made this one yellow. So right away, this is a yellow one. So I was like, oh, let's make sure we're paying attention here. But this first entry is not necessarily the reason why there, because if we look at his field ability, it says Clive gains all the special abilities of the job icon you own removed from the game. That's basically exactly what the entry down here just said. It's the same thing, which is just telling you how the ability works, which is if you have a job icon it's removed from the game, then Clive gains the special ability. Okay, cool. I'm not sure why they felt the need to like reiterate that in a different way. I guess there's an argument where like somebody could look at, if you were super literal about the way that Clive's effect text is written, you might think that he gains the special abilities of a single job icon. But I don't know. I'm just grasping at straws there to try to figure out why they felt the need to point that out. But yeah, so if, for example, you have a Behemoth 16 is removed from the game, at the same time you have one of the new Shiva 16s that's removed from the game, at the same time that you have the original Ifrit 16 removed from the game, then that means that this Clive, when he's on the field, is going to have the Zeta Flare, Ice Age, and Spit Flare special abilities. He gains those from those respective icons that are removed from the game. So that part's pretty straightforward. Now the second entry here says, if a special ability acquired in this way includes the character's name in its description, then that name is replaced with Clive. That's the interesting thing here. And it's not new. It's not a new concept by any means, but it's something where we don't see it often enough. And because priming is still a new concept overall, it's just kind of worth going over these things. And in general, when they put the card text on, they always will include the name of the card in there. And whenever the card's text includes its own name, it really just means this card. So even if in Clive's field ability, where it says Clive gains all the special abilities of the job icon you own removed from the game, they could have just written that as this card or this character gains all the special abilities of the job icon you own removed from the game. They make it a little bit more interesting by putting the name of the card in there, but really what it means is this card. So when a ability gets copied from something else, if the ability that's being copied said the name of the character on it, when it gets copied, we're not copying that part of it. We're taking that generic this character and just applying it to the character that's copying. We've known this is the case ever since the Ice Gogo card that does lots of copying because he's a mimic. And so that Ice Gogo, he has, over the years since he's been out, copied all sorts of abilities from forwards and monsters. And a heck of a lot of those included the names of the monster or the forward in it. And when those get copied, they don't keep their own name there. They change to Gogo in that situation. Example being like the Fire Ramza that you can use crystals and like changes his power and gives him additional abilities and stuff. It says like, Ramza's power becomes 9,000. If Gogo copies that, he's not copying an ability that says Ramza's ability becomes 9,000. He's now copying an ability that says Gogo's ability or Gogo's power becomes 9,000. So that's just something to keep in mind as a general rule with everything, is that if a card ever references its own name, it doesn't say, not if it says card name, mind you, but if it just says the name of the card in there, it's just talking about itself, that card physically. So what that means for us here with Clive is that let's say that he's copying Odin 16's Iron Flash special. The Iron Flash says activate Odin 16, it can attack one additional time this turn. So if Clive has that copied and you use the special is now saying activate Clive, it can attack one additional time this turn. It's not saying activate Odin 16. So if you controlled Clive and Odin 16 at the same time, and you had an Odin 16 removed from the game, using the special on Clive is not going to activate Odin. It's going to activate Clive, because the text of the ability that he has gained is now saying his own name and not the name that was written on the card. It's not the most intuitive thing, which is part of the reason I put this in yellow, just to go over it. Something else that's not flagged here, but I just want to bring it up because it's really important, is that along with the kind of new nature of this Clive, is the fact that when he's gaining these special abilities, remember that the rule about special abilities is that they've got the S cost there, and the S cost is you have to discard a card with the same card name as whatever the card is that's using that special ability. So when Clive gains all these special abilities, it is his special ability that he's gained, not the original ones. So in that example with the Odin that I just gave a moment ago, if you have Clive and he's gained the Iron Flash special, and you have an Odin 16 in your hand, you cannot discard that Odin 16 to use the Iron Flash special. Doesn't work, because Clive is not card name Odin 16, he's card name Clive. So in order to use any of these special abilities that Clive has gained, you need to discard a copy of a card named Clive to do it. So just something else to kind of make sure to keep an eye on. I'm surprised they didn't call that one out, especially since they called out the thing about how he gains abilities, and that was pretty straightforward. But anyway, so yeah, this first one off the bat, a lot of explanation required for it. Not all of these are going to be as in-depth, but yeah, there's stuff to know about this new Clive when you're playing with it or against it. Next up, we have Fang. And the first entry for Fang says, the cost to cast the next Jobless-C card is still reduced by 1, even if the player has decided not to search for a Jobless-C card first. Let me read through her ability just to give you the context for this. So her ability says, when Fang enters the field, you may search for one Jobless-C and add it to your hand. During this turn, the cost required to cast your next Jobless-C is reduced by 1. On the surface, that seems pretty straightforward. You do a search. After you do the search, now next time you play a Jobless-C this turn, it's reduced by 1. Cool, nothing crazy about that. What they're pointing out here with this entry is they're saying that because it's a may search, you might either just not do the search at all, or you might do the search and fail to find. One of those things might happen, in which case you don't actually complete the search, because if you fail to find, it doesn't count as doing a search. It only counts as doing a search once you've actually successfully gotten a card. So what they're saying here is that even if you didn't search or you failed to find, you're still going to get the cost reduction. And that's interesting, because I think that's something that people would not necessarily inherently understand if they didn't have a deeper understanding of the rules. Because we have so many effects in this game where they have multiple actions within the same effect, but the second or later action is in some way dependent on the first one happening. We have so many effects that say if you do so, or they say when you do so, or it's a choose effect, where you had to choose one or more targets, and then it does something, but then after that we have a separate sentence that does something else, a second action. But because it uses the word choose, we're bound by all the extra rules that kind of come with the word choose, and if all the targets are invalid, the whole thing gets canceled and stuff. So it's not unreasonable to think somebody would go, oh, well, I didn't do the search, so I don't get the cost reduction, right? But that's not the case here. They didn't use the phrasing of if you do so or when you do so, and there's no choosing for this. So yeah, even if for whatever reason you didn't search, you're still going to be able to cast your next Lassie reduced by 1. So you can think of it as that, when she enters the field, in general, the next Lassie that you play is going to be reduced by 1. If you had an empty deck or something, if it's the last turn, you're fighting for your life. Well, if you play her, you still can place the next thing reduced by 1. Now, the second entry for Fang says the cost to cast the next card named Behemoth card is still reduced by 4, even if the player has decided not to search for a card named Behemoth first. So her action ability is almost like a complete copy-paste of that auto ability, except that now it has to do with the card named Behemoth instead of Jobless-C, and it reduces it by 4, and it's got that restriction of that you can only do it during your turn, and of course it's also it's an action ability versus an auto ability. But the overall effect of it, where you search for Behemoth and then add it to your hand, and then now the next Behemoth you cast is reduced, conceptually very similar to the one above. So they're just giving you the same distinction here of just saying, hey, if you break her and activate her action ability, even if you didn't find a Behemoth or didn't do Now, this one's not a may, I should point out. Most of the time, searches are always a may search because most of them are auto abilities. And so most of them will say you may search. You'll notice that whenever we have a search that's attached to either an action ability or a special ability, they don't say may. And they don't say may because they don't have to, because the thing about auto abilities is you don't always control when they get triggered, but action abilities and special abilities, you certainly do control when they go on the stack. So they generally assume if you're using an ability on purpose that searches, that you want to do the search. So here, it doesn't say you may search, so you would have to still at least go through your deck. But if you failed to find, then you still get the reduction of 4 on the next Behemoth that you cast. So, good news if for some reason there's no Behemoths left and you have one in your hand and you still want to just cast it for 4 less. All right, finally we're on to something a little bit less wordy and in-depth, although I will go over this the first time that we see this instance of things, which is, so this Behemoth, this is the cycle of monsters that we have in this set. There's one for every of the 6 main elements, where they have an ability that says when they deal damage to the opponent, you put that monster into the break zone, and then there's some sort of effect. For Behemoth, it specifically says when Behemoth deals damage to your opponent, put Behemoth into the break zone. When you do so, choose one forward opponent controls, deal it 8,000 damage. Their entry in the facts for this says Behemoth is placed in the break zone at the point when abilities are resolved. The auto ability to select one forward that the opponent controls and deal 8,000 damage to it is then added to the stack after this card has been placed in the break zone. So this is potentially, or at least my opinion, the silliest thing that they do with these facts is that these when you do so auto abilities, every single card that has a when you do so gets an entry in the facts for it without fail. Every single one. So a huge chunk of these cards on the list are only there because they have the when you do so. And ever since they changed to using this phrasing back in Opus 7, I want to say it is, they had to point out back then that when you have a when you do so, that means that you have this auto ability, and when it's resolving, as part of the resolution, you do the thing, whatever it is, and then it says when you do so, and that when you do so means that everything from that point on is a new auto ability that is generated by the initial auto ability, and it goes on the stack and then needs to resolve as a separate auto ability, as opposed to before that point, whenever we had something similarly phrased, it was if you do so, and if you do so doesn't add anything new to the stack, you just continue on right on through and do all of that. But we have a lot of these effects, the vast majority of them nowadays say when you do so. It's mostly a balancing thing, because when you do so means that since it's new auto going on the stack, your opponent can wait until that happens to then cancel it in some way or another, so they can wait until you're more committed into the ability if it required doing something, some sort of payment, or doing something that is not as beneficial, some sort of either a literal cost or a figurative cost. And then after that point, it can get Amaterasu'd or what have you. And so it's more punishing to have something be when you do so, because you had to commit more before it got canceled. And so it allows them to do stronger effects because there's that drawback to it of that, okay, it's a stronger effect, but there's the chance that you're going to get hosed by this if it gets canceled. So anyway, because of that, for all of these, whenever it says when you do so, they're going to give us a FAQ entry for it. So just be prepared. We're going to see that a lot from here through the end. Okay, next is Anabella, who does not have a when you do so. Now, her entry here points out that the primed state is required to activate this card's auto ability, and just paying the cost to prime does not activate the ability. Reading through her ability, which is actually, I think, shorter, less words than the FAQ entry. Her ability says, when a character you control is priming, choose one character, dull it, and freeze it. Part of the reason I wanted to bring this up is because priming is still a relatively new concept. This is only the second set that we've had that included anything to do with priming in it. So it's, still people are not fully, I don't know, I want to say invested, but that's not the right word. People are not fully ingrained with every little nuance to priming, partially because it's a very complicated mechanic and partially because we just don't have that many cards that do it. most people by this point know how Clive priming into a Freet works, and maybe they've seen a couple of the other ones, but it's not a regular thing that we just are seeing all the time. So why they're putting this on here is that this process of priming involves like multiple steps here. First is that you're paying the priming costs, and then after you pay the priming costs, you're going directly to searching for the card that it can prime into. You go into the deck, you pull out the card that matches that name that you're going to prime into. You finish shuffling your deck and presenting it, and then after that, the third step is putting that card physically on top of the card that did the priming, and now it has essentially transformed into the new card text of everything that's there. It's the same character, but it's now had all of its text except for its card name replaced by whatever's on top. So it's paying, searching, placing, and the wording they use here for is priming is something that we saw previously on Dion and Barnabas, and it was important on them because of the fact that their auto abilities trigger from priming, but the nature of how priming works means that they needed it to trigger somewhere in the middle of the process and not the end, because if you did it at the end, they no longer would have their abilities anymore to trigger in the first place. So to make it functional, they had to come up with this is priming wording. It's a little bit awkward, but the specific moment where something is considered to be is priming is after you have put aside the card from the search. So after you put aside the card from the search and you're maybe shuffling or presenting or whatever, but like you're locked in at that point to like, this is the card that I've searched for, and we're going to be priming into this, but we haven't fully like actually put the card on yet and like done that last step of the process. At that point, when you're locked into it's about, it's like you're at the point of no return, let's say, then you're considered to be is priming. And so that's when like Dion and Barnabas trigger. And the same thing here with Anabella. Now, the reason why they specifically did this FAQ entry is because since that step of it, after you've hit the point of no return, is where you're considered this is where the trigger event is. What they're saying is that you can't just pay the priming cost and then fail to find in order to get the auto ability. Because if you had, for example, the new Joshua, where he can prime into Phoenix 16 for 1 fire, you can't just go, oh, okay, I'm going to prime, I'm going to pay 1 fire, and then do the search, and then go, oh, failed to find, but now I just triggered Anabella, and now I'm going to dull and freeze a character. And then you know what? I'm going to pay 1 again, and I'm going to go ahead and prime. Oh, never mind, I'm not going to prime, but I triggered Anabella, so that doesn't work. You can't do that. If you don't successfully find on the search and like carry out the full priming, you do not trigger anything that says that its trigger event has to do with when a character is priming. So that's the important distinction there on this. Okay, next up we have Wool. This is going to be our first simple one here, because Wool, this is just a when you do so. His entry is just about the when you do so. So his second ability there, the auto, just says when Wool attacks, you may discard 2 cards. When you do so, choose 1 forward, break it. It's all the same stuff I mentioned on the Behemoth monster, so nothing to add there. Kuja, also when you do so. So same thing, that's why it's green. So when Kuja's, it's the first one. When Kuja enters the field, you may remove 1 ice backup you control from the game. When you do so, your opponent discards 2 cards. So it's that thing again. After you've removed the ice backup from the game, when you resolve the auto, it's just creating a second auto that goes on the stack that says, when you do so, your opponent discards 2 cards. Pretty simple. Cripshay, also when you do so. This is the second in that series of monsters, or that cycle of monsters that I mentioned, like Behemoth, where it deals damage and then puts itself into the break zone and then has a when you do so. In the case of Cripshay, it says when you do so, your opponent discards 2 cards. So again, nothing to add there. So just kind of rapid fire whenever we have these when you do so's. It's just silly to me that they are so committed to every time there's a when you do so auto. They're like, we have to remind them. We have to say it again. They have to know that this creates a new auto. All right, but now we're into red. Whew, okay, our first red one, Cid WOFF. Before I get into what his entries are, let's just talk about his text because that's a lot shorter. So Cid WOFF's ability says, when your opponent uses an X burst, your opponent randomly discards one card. All right, cool. Conceptually, not too crazy. Like, it's easy enough to understand what happens here. It's very much like Lenna, the water Lenna backup. In her case, she's got the when your opponent uses an X burst, draw a card. In the case of Cid WOFF here, it's just when your opponent uses an X burst, your opponent randomly discards one card. So same trigger event, kind of the opposite in terms of who's either gaining or losing a card. But let's get into the reason why I have this red here. So the first entry says, if taking damage and triggering an X burst, Cid WOFF's auto ability is triggered after the X burst effect is resolved. However, if an X burst is able to interrupt the sequence, for example, Lunafreya, then Cid WOFF's auto ability is triggered before the X burst effect is resolved instead. Before I get into what all that means, I'm going to do a quick aside here that part of the issue with the facts is they use some questionable language sometimes, and I think a lot of it comes down to it's just like translation awkwardness, going from what it is originally in Japanese to being translated into English. And I think the people who do the translating into English are not necessarily like people who play a lot or have a deep understanding of the rules, and so they're mostly just kind of copying. Again, this is all my guess. I could be completely wrong here, but I think the people who are doing the translating and the localizing are there's a little bit of just kind of lost here sometimes with these FAQ entries. The reason why I'm saying that here is because of how they're using the word when something's triggered. So I'll explain what this means, and then I'll kind of say why their wording is awkward. What this means here is they're just pointing out that there's two situations where Cid's auto ability is going to trigger. One is that it's going to trigger when there's damage that's taken due to like not blocking, right? Or sorry, let me rephrase that. Two situations where an X burst is happening. It's not the damage. Whew. All right. Two situations where there's an X burst. One is when you take damage. That can cause an X burst. The other one is when an effect triggers an X burst, such as Lunafreya and Axstar. It's the only two that we have at the moment that can do that. So in the situation where it's damage that caused an X burst effect to happen, X bursts from damage, they don't go on the stack. They resolve immediately. And so because they resolve immediately, anything that triggers as a result of doing that X burst, it does trigger immediately, and then it's got to wait. It's got to chill there until the active player gains priority, and then those auto abilities get added to the stack, and then you handle resolving those things or adding to the stack and all that. So what they're pointing out here is, okay, when it's due to damage, the order of events is that the X burst is going to finish resolving, and then you have this auto going onto the stack and resolving. So you would finish resolving the X burst, and then you would eventually get to your opponent has to randomly discard a card. The other situation where it's Axstar or Lunafreya that is using the X burst effect is the opposite, because those cards explicitly say that those X bursts go onto the stack. They wouldn't normally with damage, but in the case of those that are activating it, it does go on the stack. And because of that, what happens is that you choose for it to go on the stack, like in the case of Lunafreya, and then at that point it triggers Cid WOFF, but we have to finish resolving the Lunafreya, which includes putting the X burst effect on the stack. And then after it's on the stack, now we have that triggered Cid WOFF that gets put on the stack. And now they're going to resolve the other way around. Now we're going to have the Cid resolve first. That's going to make you randomly discard, or your opponent rather. And then the X burst that went onto the stack due to the Lunafreya is going to resolve. So just be aware that the order of events here is going to be flipped depending on whether it was from damage or whether it was from an effect that was an ability that was adding it to the stack. Where I have issue with their wording on this is they say the auto ability is triggered after the X burst effect is resolved, and it just rubs me the wrong way there, because that's not how it works. They're saying that it doesn't get triggered until after the X burst is resolved, but we know that auto abilities always trigger immediately when their trigger event happens. It's just that they have to wait to be put on the stack. So I think they're using the word triggered here to mean when it goes on the stack, but the trigger happens immediately. So it's not the first time we're going to see language awkwardness going over these facts today, but it's worth just pointing out that sometimes it's clunky, what the way things are written here. That also happens a lot when asking them questions on Twitter, which there's an obvious language barrier there, and sometimes you have to kind of fight through that. But even with these official ones that are put up and prepared ahead of time, it can still be wonky. The second part of this is going to further hammer that point home. They said Cid WOFF's auto ability is still triggered even if an X-Burst has removed him from the field. And this one, like I said, it's even more obvious because they're saying if you take them at the way it's written, they're saying that the auto ability is triggered even after the X-Burst is removed from the field. So if we were to read that literally, they're saying, oh, we did the X-Burst, and as resolving that X-Burst, it removed Cid from the field. And now that we're finished removing Cid from the field, now his auto ability is going to trigger and go on the stack. And that makes zero sense. That makes zero sense because he's not in the right zone for it to trigger anymore. So it actually doesn't, it annoys me because the way that the rules function, it's not possible for it to trigger after he's already left. So it just further hammers home that the ability triggers immediately as soon as we've decided we're using the X-Burst. And then, so if you had an X-Burst that said it returned a character to your opponent's hand, then, okay, that X-Burst comes up, they go, I'm going to use the X-Burst. Ding, we triggered Cid, and his auto ability has triggered, but is waiting to be put on the stack. And then we resolve that X-Burst because it's a damage and return Cid to the hand. But we know that once an auto ability has triggered, it's independent from its source. So that auto that was chilling out here is still going to go on the stack after we resolve the X-Burst. But the way they've written it, where they're like, oh, it doesn't trigger until after you do it, and by the way, it's going to trigger even if he's left the field, is just nonsensical. So a little bit of me just kind of translating what they mean by it. But so Cid WOFF, just be aware of how all of that resolves depending on whether it's from a damage or from an effect. Okay, luckily this is an easy one here because Cid Raines, it's just a when you do so. That's why we're green. His auto is when a forward enters your opponent's field other than from their hand, you may put Cid Raines in the break zone. When you do so, break it. So after you've put him into the break zone, creates that when you do so, break it, puts that on the stack as a separate auto, and then you just resolve that. As a little side note, the thing about Cid Raines' effect is that there's no choosing anywhere in it, so his effect gets around things that can't be chosen. Kind of like that lightning mirror that triggers when forward enters your opponent's field. All right, next up, Jill, continuing with all of the priming entries here and just really hammering home our understanding of priming. So the first bit here is, and this is the reason why she's got the yellow, is it says, if the number of job icon cards referenced is somehow changed prior to the first auto ability being resolved, the number of characters originally selected are still dulled, even if the number of job icon cards has fallen below that number. So her first auto ability, it says when Jill enters the field, choose up to the same number of characters as the job icon in your break zone and or job icon you own removed from the game. Dull them. So let's say, for example, we had 2 Ifrit 16s that are removed from the game right now, and we have 2 Shiva 16s that are in the break zone. Jill enters the field, and because we got 2 and 2 there, that means we're going to choose 4 up to 4 characters and dull them. And so that would happen when the auto ability is put on the stack. You would choose the up to 4 there, and then when we eventually go to resolve it, we're going to dull those 4, as long as at least one of those targets is still valid when we get to it. Why they're putting this here is because it definitely makes sense that somebody might go, well, hold on a second. What if when we go to resolve this, that number of icons has changed in the remove from play zone and break zone? I can't think of a good reason this would happen, but let's just pretend that Jill triggered and we chose our targets, and then before it resolves, we cast Kusith and decide to go grab one of those Shiva 16s from the break zone and add it to our hand. So now when we go to resolve it, now there's only 3 in the break zone and remove from play zone combined instead of the 4 from before. I can see where somebody would be like, well, hold on, now we only have 3 and we're resolving. Is it only going to be 3 targets? And that does make sense also in that somebody would come to that conclusion because there are so many things in this game where it doesn't get decided until it resolves, or doesn't happen until it resolves, or where something gets checked again when it resolves. And so this obviously gets checked when it gets put on the stack, but there's a lot of things that get checked both then and then when they resolve on the stack. So wouldn't blame somebody for going, what happens if we have less when we go to resolve it? And what they're saying here with this is they're saying it's locked in. Like once we've put it on the stack, we've locked in the number of targets, and it doesn't matter if the amount of things what was the variable basically, if that changed, it doesn't matter beyond when it triggers and we've chosen our targets. So yeah, not the most intuitive thing. We've seen it before. There's the 2CP Celeste that has the same exact effect, except that it's for the number of Final Fantasy VI characters you control. And there are, if you go way back to like I think Opus 2 Nono and one of the other Moogles, they choose a number of targets based off the number of Moogles that you have, but maybe that number of Moogles changes before resolution. So not a new concept, but we just don't see it a lot. And so I thought, yeah, we should probably just draw some attention to that one, put it in yellow. The second entry for her is because she has a when you do so. So the other auto ability says at the beginning of the attack phase during each of your turns, you may pay ice. And when you do so, choose one dull forward and break it. So that's the same straightforward thing I've been saying about when you do so effects. It's just you pay the ice, and then after that, now we have a new auto ability that goes on the stack. That's when you do so, choose one dull forward and break it. All right, now I'll be honest, I don't know what the correct pronunciation of this is. I don't know if it's Halone or Halone. I'm inclined to think it's Halone, so I'm going to say it's Halone until somebody tells me otherwise. But for now, yeah, we're going to go with that. So my Halone has a first name, and it's Halone. Anyway, Halone says, if not a single character has been selected, then the opponent does not discard from their hand. What does that mean? Well, Halone's effect says, when Halone enters the field or attacks, choose up to 2 characters. If you control 6 or more, job the 12, dull them and freeze them. Your opponent discards 1 card. So this auto ability, it does say choose up to 2 characters. So you could choose 2 characters, you could choose 1 character, you could choose 0 characters. They're putting this in there to point out that if you intentionally choose 0 characters, the whole thing just removes itself from the stack. It just doesn't happen. So you can't be cheeky and be like, well, I'm just going to choose nothing and just make you discard. Haha. It's not how it works. You have to choose at least 1 target for this to happen. And that's what their entry is there about. But separate from that, of course, because this is a choose wording on an effect, we're bound by all of the rules that happen with choosing, meaning that if you did choose at least 1 character, then when this ability resolves, if all of the chosen characters are invalid when it resolves, the whole thing gets canceled, including your opponent discards a card. And if you chose at least 1, and when it resolves, at least 1 of those targets is still valid, then it will resolve as much as possible. So let's say you chose 2 of them, and then 1 of them is invalid for some reason. It left the field, or now it can't be chosen by abilities or something. Then you will still dull and freeze the other target, and then your opponent still discards 1. So just a couple of cases there. They don't mention this here, but it was a question that came up on Twitter when they first spoiled it. So I'm also going to bring up that people were wondering if it was required to have the 6 job the 12 out there to get the discard. Because, again, doing a literal reading of this, the way that it's the text is there, you could be forgiven for thinking that the if you control 6 or more job the 12 only applies to the sentence that it's in, where it does the dull and freeze them. And since your opponent discards 1 card is separate from that, wouldn't have been the craziest thing to think like, oh, well, the dull and freeze is relying on the controlling 6 job the 12, but the discard is just an independent thing. And that's not the case. It's everything after the if you control 6 or more is all reliant. It's all got that requirement of having 6 or more job the 12. So be aware of that too, for those of you who are experimenting with the 12, or if your opponents are. Okay, we got another red one. Speaking of the 12, Menphina. So she's got 2 entries, and the first one is definitely not the reason that she's red, because the first one is just because she's got it when you do so. They pop up everywhere, even on red ones. Her effect is when Menphina enters the field, you may pay X. When you do so, search for one job the 12 of cost X or less and play it onto the field. You can only pay X with CP produced by job the 12 backups and or discarding job the 12 cards. So yeah, the first one here is just because she's got a when you do so search for so it's the okay, you pay X, after you've paid X, then the when you do so search, that whole thing goes on the stack. So that's what that's about. We don't have to go over it anymore. But the second half here, the second entry, says it is possible to pay the cost of X using CP generated by discarding a job the 12 card from your hand, or CP generated from a job the 12 backup card. Hearing that, you might think, why in the heck have I made this red? Because that's literally exactly like, it's just a rephrasing of what's on her own card. Her card says you can only pay X with CP produced by job the 12 backups and or discarding job the 12 cards. So why is this here? And it's not because the ruling itself is particularly confusing or unclear. I put it in red here just because it's something where we haven't had effects like this. I can't think of a single one where the way that you pay for it is restricted in like how you generate that CP. There might be one. Like the back of my brain says, oh, there is one where you have to pay with something, and I can't remember what it is. So somebody is going to look it up or remember and end up commenting it on this video. But at this point in time while I'm recording, I don't remember. So there might be one, maybe 2, I don't know. But even if there is, they're not things that saw wide meta play where we were used to seeing that all the time. So the reason I'm bringing this up is just because whether you're playing the 12 or if your opponent is, I have a feeling there's going to be a bunch of people experimenting with this set. It's just really important to make sure that you're paying properly, because people are so used to just, well, I just pay the X and then do the thing. So just be really on top of both players, on top of making sure that that X is paid properly. Because from a judging perspective, it's a giant pain if you come like a minute later and go, oh, yeah, we realized after the fact that they paid and it wasn't all with CP that was generated by 12 related stuff, and we did a bunch of other steps since then, and so what do we do now? Right? There's not an easy rewind if you've done a bunch of stuff since then, and it just seems like an easy thing to miss. So yeah, I just mostly wanted to bring up the red flag to be like, anytime somebody's doing this effect, just be dang sure that they are paying for it properly. Okay, so just like watch out. Be on the lookout for that. All right, much simpler here. Sky Samurai. Sky Samurai, her entry says if not a single backup card has been selected, then Sky Samurai's power is not increased by 2,000. So Sky Samurai has the auto ability, says when Sky Samurai attacks, choose up to 2 backups, activate them. Sky Samurai gains plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. This is the same ruling as the Halone, which is why I have this in green here. Because it's that's that thing we've seen before. So just like with Halone, if you chose 0 backups on purpose, then you're not going to get the plus 2,000 power, because the whole thing just pulls itself off the stack before anybody can do anything about it. And then if you chose at least one target, and then when it goes to resolve, all those targets are invalid, then also you're not going to get 2,000 power. So that's why she's on the list. Okay, Fina. This Fina is all about warp and doing interesting stuff with warp, and her entry says it is possible to select an opponent's card that has been removed from the game using Fina's ability. If this results in the final warp counter being taken away, then that character is placed on its owner's field. What we're talking about is her action abilities, which has the dull icon, and it says choose one card removed from the game, remove one warp counter from it. You can only use this ability during your turn. There's not a lot of situations where you want to remove a warp counter from your opponent's card, but there are some. So most people maybe just doesn't clock for them reading this that like, oh, we can choose any card. It doesn't have to be your own card with a warp counter on it. And so that's why I wanted to kind of draw attention to this and make it in yellow, is just so that you're aware that, yeah, I can target either one, and it's going to, if you do so, it's going to make for some weird potentially weird situations you wouldn't expect. Because the way that warp works, it's not required to be during your turn or even to be during the main phase for warp to trigger to enter the warped character onto the field. Now, we're used to it happening in main phase 1 on somebody's turn because that's just the way that it's kind of designed and the way that it works out. But if we have effects like this that can interact with warp, then weird things can happen. So her ability, for example, it just says you can only use it during your turn. So you could use it during the attack phase. You could be in the middle of attacking and then go ahead and use her ability, remove the last warp counter from your opponent's card, and then suddenly your opponent's card is entering the field during your attack phase. It's usually not beneficial for that to happen, but it could happen. And just in general, you could choose their thing to make it enter. There are definitely strategic applications of this, because before Fina came around, we have Vane already, who does the same thing, right? That Vane says that he's got the auto ability that you can remove a warp counter from a character removed from the game, and that didn't have to be your own either. And I have had this happen to me. Funny story. At the 2023 Nationals, I was playing against Mr. Brian Cevallos on his Warp Golbez Archfiends deck. And I was playing Mono Lightning, and I warped my Estinian. So Estinian's sitting there with his 1 warp counter, and then pass over to Brian's turn. And during Brian's turn, he plays Vane, and then uses Vane's effect to remove the warp counter from my Estinian. And then suddenly my Estinian is entering the field on Brian's turn, and Estinian comes in and does his big old, oh, cool, I just came in off a warp, so I get these auto abilities. I've just now gained haste and brave, and I can attack twice this turn. Except that it's the opponent's turn. So he can't attack at all, and the haste doesn't matter. So, turns out, pretty good strategic choice there to prevent the Estinian from coming in during my turn and causing havoc. And so yeah, Brian bypassed the whole thing, having my Estinian come in on his turn, and then he also got to draw a card from the Vane for his trouble. So anyway, there's reasons why you could do it, but yeah, you can choose to have Fina remove opponents' warp counters if you want to, and just cause weird warp chaos in places you don't expect it. All right, Gorger. This is the next in that cycle of monsters that we've had. So the Behemoth and the Cripshay so far. Gorger's auto is when Gorger deals damage to your opponent, put Gorger into the break zone. When you do so, choose up to 3 backups, activate them, draw 1 card. So as with the rest, it's the after it gets put in the break zone, you now have the when you do so, blah, 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 gets added to the stack. Larsa, also when you do so. Here it's when a category 12 forward you control is put from the field into the break zone, you may put Larsa into the break zone. When you do so, add it to your hand. So it's after Larsa gets put in the break zone, created a new auto ability that's when you do so, add it to your hand, and pop that on the stack. I will point out, just as a little side here, that Mr. Jeff Curran asked about this card when it got spoiled on Twitter, because the phrasing on Larsa's card is a little vague. The when you do so just says when you do so, add it to your hand, but the preceding part of the ability is talking about both a category 12 forward that you control is put into the field, and it's also talking about Larsa. So there's a little bit of vagueness of like, well, what are we adding to my hand? Are we adding the Larsa back to the hand? Are we adding the forward back to the hand? What is it in this scenario? And the proper answer there is that we're talking about the category 12 forward that kind of triggered the auto in the first place. That gets added back to your hand, not Larsa. So just in case that was unclear. Ignis. Oh, Ignis. So Ignis is very red here, and this is going to be the most complex one that I go over in this video. So are you ready for story time? We're going to do story time. Let's talk about Ignis's ability first, what it says. It says, when Ignis enters the field, you may dull 2 active forwards you control. When you do so, choose 1 forward, deal it damage equal to the total power of the forwards you dulled due to this ability. All right, the use case for this. Let's say that we've got Ignis and we've got some other... what Earth forward do I want to put out into this right now? Opus 5 Wool. I don't know why I chose that, but it's the first thing that popped in my head. we've got Ignis. We have Opus 5 Wool, who's an 8k body. And we played Ignis, enters the field, and then we decide, you know what? We're going to dull Ignis. We're going to dull Wool. They have a combined total of 15,000 power. So we chose a forward the opponent controlled, and now we're going to deal at 15,000 damage. Okay? That should be easy enough to understand just based off of the way that his auto is worded. Now, the first of his 2 entries here is because it's a when you do so. So that part's a little bit of the letdown here, which is that you dull the 2 forwards and then you get when you do so. Haha, okay. Here's that story again of putting another auto on the stack that's generated by the first auto. That's not why we're red. We're red because of the second one here. Because, and this is cut and paste exactly the way that they have it written on the facts on the page. If any cards selected to be dulled by this auto ability are removed from the field before the effect is resolved, the power value referenced is the value remaining on the field. Now, when I read this, it pinged for me as like, that's not what I expected. I didn't think that that's how this would work, because the way that it's written, I think the way that anybody would interpret the wording they use there is that we've got 2 forwards that we dulled, and they're saying if any of them leave the field, then we're only going to look at what's still on the field when it resolves. If that Wool gets popped out of here before resolution, and now I've only got Ignis on the field when this is resolving, then according to the way this is phrased, it would deal 7,000 damage. Because it's the power value reference is the value remaining on the field. What's remaining on the field? The Ignis is remaining on the field. He's got 7,000 power, and now we've dealt 7,000 damage. So I saw that, and I was like, that's not what I expected, because we have a precedent for this already. It's a little different, but the precedent we have is if you go all the way back to Opus 2. It's the first time I remember this effect coming up. The Light Warrior of Light in Opus 2 has a special ability called Bitter End. And the effect for Bitter End says, choose 1 forward. I think it has to be opponent controls, but anyway, choose 1 forward. Deal it damage equal to Warrior of Light's power. Now, this is different than the type of effects that people call fight effects, which don't have an official term in FFTCG, but people call it that because that's, I think, similar to what Magic uses for that term. So these fight effects that we are used to seeing are things like Opus 4 Hecatonk here, or the dual element Noctis, or I think the Fire Eject, I think also is written the same way. Those are effects where the way it's worded, it says choose 1 forward. The opponent, choose 1 forward you control, 1 forward opponent controls. They each deal their respective power. They each deal damage equal to their respective power to each other. And those type of effects, the way that they're written, it's commanding each of the forwards to deal damage directly to each other, so that the source of the damage is not the ability. The ability is just commanding them to do their own damage to each other. And because of the way that those effects work, if one of those forwards leaves the field before it resolves, then the damage doesn't get dealt by that forward because they haven't received the command yet to do the damage until after they're off the field. So it doesn't go through. However, when we have something like this Bitter End special that I just described, it doesn't say that that Warrior of Light is dealing the damage. It says deal damage equal to Warrior of Light's power to the forward. So in this case, it's the ability, not the forward directly itself, but the ability that's dealing the damage, but the variable on how much damage is based off of Warrior of Light's power. Why is this important? Because if Warrior of Light leaves the field, then we would have the question of, well, how much damage does it deal, right? It's not on the field anymore. Now, this isn't one of those fight effects, so it's the damage has already been launched, but now we're figuring out how much it deals when it resolves. But Warrior of Light's not on the field. So there's a term that we have in the rules where we talk about last known information. Last known information means what was that value right before it left the field. So in the case of Warrior of Light, it's normally an 8,000 power forward. And so if it left the field, assuming that there wasn't any power reductions done to it, it would leave the field as 8,000 power forward, and then when his ability resolved, You can go, oh, well, he's not on the field, but the last known power for him was 8,000, so we're dealing 8,000 damage with the bitter end special. And there have been other cards like that are phrased that way. The Ursula, the 4CP Ursula, also phrased the same way, where it's not her directly dealing damage, but her ability does damage that is based off of her own power. So same thing if she leaves the field. So that all being said, thanks for sticking with me so far through this. Ignis, when I saw Ignis's ability, not having read the F.A.Q entry, I just went, oh, okay. Well, definitely got to keep in mind that if something leaves the field, we're going to use the last known information, right? So people, like, I think I even told it to a couple people, like, hey, just be aware, if that leaves the field, because this is not fight damage or fight effect or whatever, we're going to use last known information. So cool. Then I read the F.A.Q entry and I went, what? It says to use the power value reference as the value remaining on the field. And I was like, that's weird. So I was like wondering and trying to just pour over my brain. I'm like, is this because there's two forwards that we're doing? And then one of them, if one of them leaves, we still have the other one. And so it's not really last known because we still actually have something that is known on the field. But then if that's the case, what happens if they both leave the field? Are we then going to use last known because neither one of them are there? But would the last known be like if they left at separate times? Like, so anyway, it's a whole spaghetti brain thing of like, what's going on with this? Because just the way that their ruling here is listed, it just completely flew in the face of like what I expected or my understanding of how an effect like that's written like this should work. So I looked on Twitter. I'm like, did anybody ask? Did anybody else bring this up to them? And somebody else did ask. And they were like, hey, what would happen, if somebody got removed? And I think they even brought up the fact that it's worded the same as that Ursula, but we know that the Ursula still deals damage from last known information, but this is specifically saying that you don't do last known information. And they had a little bit of a back and forth, and they said, and they basically just reiterated what's right here. They said, oh, you referenced the value remaining on the field. And then the person asked, well, then how come Ursula works differently? And they went, oh, because of 6.4.2 in the rules. And if you look, that's the thing that tells you use last known information. So I see that and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, they just confirmed that Ursula works the way we expected because that's what in the rules, but they didn't actually say why Ignis is not working the same way as Ursula. Like they didn't explain it. So I popped in and I went, hello. So that seems to contradict what like the F.A.Q entry contradicts 6.4.2. So what is the rule that specifically says that Ignis is treated differently than Ursula? Like what rule is it that I'm missing that treats this differently? And they replied and they went, oh, well, if Ignis, if one of them leaves the field, then use last known information. And then I again went, what? Like, because that's the opposite of what the F.A.Q entry says. And it's also the opposite of what they said earlier in the same question, where they said use the value remaining on the field. So I'm like, okay, these two things seem to contradict each other. The F.A.Q entry is saying look at the value remaining on the field. And then now the answer they've just given to me is to say, no, you use the last known information. And I'm like, okay, well, these two things, they can't coexist, right? So this has got to be maybe it's a translation issue again, right? Maybe it's like the problem with the Cid WOFF, where we just have like something is not lining up translation wise. We have a language barrier. Okay, let's see if we can work through it. So I gave them the situation. I said, all right, what if I had Ignis and I had a 6K vanilla Earth forward on the field? I used the Opus 1 Monk. That's just a 6K 2CP forward. Just keep it as simple as possible. So I've got a 7K Ignis and a 6K Monk. I said, all right, can you tell me how much damage would be dealt here? I'm like, I have these two on the field. I dull both of them to choose opponent's forward. And before it resolves, the Monk leaves the field. How much damage would that deal? And they said, oh, it deals 13,000 damage. Okay. And then I said, same situation. I dull Ignis and I dull this Monk. And then before resolution, both Ignis and the Monk leave the field. how much damage gets dealt to the forward? And they go, oh, 13,000 damage. Cool. So all of this to come back around to that the card works the way that I expected it to. Their FAQ it's fact up. I guess is what I'll say there. Yeah. There's something about the way this is written that's just completely wrong. I feel it, maybe they were trying when they wrote power value references, the value remaining on the field. Maybe they were trying to in some way by saying remaining on the field, trying to imply the last known information. Like, I don't know. Again, I'm trying to use like pretzel logic here to make it work. But the end result is on Twitter, they've told me that this works exactly the way that we expect it to as far as using last known information. So if this ever came up in a judging situation, I would just point to my answer from them and say, well, they said that this is how much damage gets dealt. So, having just worked through all of the language stuff, when I asked them directly in the situation where 1 forward is removed and then also when 2 forwards are removed, their answer was that the damage did not change based off of what it would have been if they were both on the field the whole time. So that's my Ignis story. Thanks for sticking with me through all that. This entry is just, there's something wrong here. All right, hopefully the next one's easier. Oh yeah, this is easy. Vanille, she's got a when you do so. So when Vanille's put from the field in the break zone, you may remove Vanille from the game. When you do so, choose one category 13 forward in your break zone, add it to your hand. So yeah, when she's put in the break zone, you can remove her, and then at that point, add the when you do so auto onto the stack. Easy peasy. We've got it a whole bunch of times so far, and we're going to get more of them. Eiko, her 2 entries. First one says, Eiko's ability requires 4 summons to be selected. If only 3 or fewer If only 3 or fewer summons are present in the break zone, then the effect is not added to the stack. So going over that, if we look at the way that her auto is written, it says when Eiko enters the field, choose 4 summons in your break zone. Now we don't have to look at anything beyond that to understand what this first entry is. Just choose 4 summons in your break zone. So that's straightforward in terms of what the rules are, but it's just that we're not used to seeing either a number that big or a number that big that doesn't say up to. So because it says choose 4 summons, it means you need to have 4 legal targets when this auto ability is being put on the stack in order for it to actually be properly put on the stack. Otherwise, it's just going to cancel itself out before it even can be responded to or anything. So yeah, you need to have 4 valid targets for this. That being said, we're doing this is the choose rules and the choose all the stuff that comes along with that. So that means you do have to choose 4 in order for it to go on the stack. But when you go to resolve it, as long as at least one of those targets is valid, you're going to resolve this as much as possible. So now we can talk about what the rest of the effect is. The rest of the effect says, put them on the top of your deck in any order, then shuffle your deck and reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. Cast up to 1 summon among them without paying the cost, and put the rest of the cards into the break zone. So yeah, as long as at least one of these summons is still valid when the ability is resolving, then you'll still put however many summons that is on top of the deck, do the shuffling, and so forth. But yeah, their entry here is just pointing out that you have to have 4. And it's just because, again, we don't usually see a choose with a number that's that high and doesn't also say up to. So just be aware of that. Otherwise, you're going to have a feels bad if you cast Eiko with less than 4 in your break zone and you just paid 4 for a 5k summoner. Now, the other part of her entry says, summons cast via this auto ability are added to the stack after auto ability effects are resolved. I feel like this is another awkward translation thing, because I believe what they're trying to say here is they're saying that this is all an auto ability, right? All of her text is one single auto ability. And it's telling you, after you've done all the effects of this auto ability, then the summon cast during it is put on the stack. But that's actually not the order of events here anyway. You're supposed to, as part of resolving it, you're casting the summon, which includes putting it on the stack. So resolving this in general, you'll already have this summon on the stack by the time that you've finished resolving the rest of it, because you should be resolving things in the order it's written. So since it says cast up to one summon among them without paying a cost and put the rest of the cards in the break zone, you should be casting the summon first and then put the rest of the cards in the break zone. Like, just resolve it in the order it's written. And so by the time you finish resolving all the effects, the summon's already on the stack. So I'm not really sure why they wrote that there, to be honest. Like I said, it's maybe a translation thing again. Okay, Zangan. He does not have a when you do so, but he's green. So his entry says Zangan and cards with the card name Tifa can use abilities that include being dulled in the cost from the turn that they appear on the field, but are unable to attack. So his field ability says Zangan and the card name Tifa you control can use action abilities and special abilities with the dull icon on the cost as though they had haste. And that's one where if you just read it, just reading the ability basically explains it to you. It's telling you, oh, okay, yeah. He's got a dull icon ability himself. So it's just saying, yeah, it's a dull icon ability, but he's allowed to use it. His own field ability allows him to use it the turn that he entered the field. And if you have a card named Tifa, she can also do things with the dull icon there, even if she just entered the field that turn. And yeah, so I'm not really sure why they needed to point this out, because it feels like the ability explains the ability. They just wanted, for some reason, to put in extra, like, okay, we're saying that it's like the word haste, but it's not haste. It's not haste. It's like haste, but it's not haste. Don't try to attack with this. And I'm like, okay, but I feel like if somebody was misinterpreting this to think that they can also attack, then the natural thing would be like, why didn't they just write Zangan and the card name Tifa you control gain haste? Right? That would have been much simpler if they actually wanted it to function like haste. Because the only difference between this ability and haste is whether or not you can attack. Actually, no, I should... Okay, in all fairness, the other difference in this ability is that because Zangan doesn't technically have haste, it does mean that anything that interacts with haste would not be able to interact with him in the same way. So a trickster that's blocking Zangan would still take damage because he doesn't actually have haste. Or a Cid Sophiar can't steal his haste, right? So I guess yeah. Anyway, I still think it's silly that they wrote this in here, because it seems very straightforward. Like, I don't know who's going to confuse that, but it's here, so we're talking about it. Titan. Okay, remember before with Ignis, where I went on the long journey of Ignis and talked about how there are certain effects that people colloquially call fight effects, and this is one of those. So Titan's effect says choose one forward you control and one forward opponent controls. The former gains plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. Then the former deals damage equal to its power to the latter. So this is an effect that, as part of its resolution, is going to command a forward to deal damage equal to its power to another forward. So the source of the damage is not Titan. The source of the damage is the forward. Titan is, in so many words, going up to the forward, poking him on the shoulder, and going, go punch that guy. All right? That's as much as Titan is involved. Maybe give him a little pat on the back to give him plus 2k. Okay? So, because of that, they're just pointing out here the thing we know about these type of effects, which is that if that forward, that in this case, it's the former forward that's chosen, if that forward leaves the field before Titan actually resolves, it's not going to deal any damage because it didn't start the process of beginning to deal damage. In that scenario where Titan is patting him on the back and going, go punch that guy, well, if the forward's gone, that means Titan is walking up to literally no one, patting nobody on the back, and I guess pointing at the other guy, but there's no one. There's no point in him pointing because you're not commanding anything, right? So that person's gone before they even got the command to go punch the other one. So yeah, there is nothing new about this, and if you're familiar with how these type of effects work, then you'll know how this one works too. Tama's got a when you do so. So his action ability has two possible actions, and the second one is you may pay a crystal. When you do so, choose one category WOFF character in your break zone and add it to your hand. So for the umpteenth time, yeah, after you pay the crystal, we just add the second auto ability onto the stack. Mandragora. It's got to when you do so. It's part of our cycle. And this one is when it deals damage to your opponent, put Mandragora into the break zone. When you do so, choose one card in your break zone, add it to your hand. Okay, so that's all I have to say about that one. This one's not a when you do so. So now Dark Fina. Her entry says a summon cast after resolving the effect of the first auto ability is placed on the stack. This is actually the same awkward wording as the Eiko, but let's go over what Dark Fina does just to get the full context. She has 2 auto abilities. The first one says, when Dark Fina enters the field, you may cast one summon of cost 7 or less from your hand without paying the cost. Second auto ability says, when you cast a summon, choose one character in your break zone, add it to your hand. This effect will trigger only during your turn and only once per turn. So this is talking about that first auto ability where you get to cast a summon of cost 7 or less from your hand without paying the cost. They're saying the summon cast after resolving the effects of the first auto ability is placed on the stack. Yeah, it is. I mean, there's nothing more complicated in this one like there was with Eiko, so it's very straightforward. I guess maybe the other reason why they're putting this in here is just because they want it to be clear that even though you're casting it via an effect, it's still going on the stack. Like you're not casting it and resolving it immediately, or you're not casting it in a way that doesn't put it on the stack. So maybe that's it. Maybe they're just putting it on there because it's an effect that casts a summon, and they're like, hey, by the way, we're still following the process here. But then also, since she has an ability, auto ability that triggers off of a summon being cast, it does mean that the normal use case for this Dark Fina is that she'll enter the field, you'll cast a summon of cost 7 less from your hand without paying the cost, goes on the stack, and because you cast that, it's going to trigger her second auto ability to choose a character in your break zone and add it to your hand. Vivian. Vivian's here for the same reason that Anabella was. We can skip most of her text here because we're talking about her auto ability at the end that says when a character you control is priming, draw one card. And her F.A.Q entry says this card must be in the primed state to trigger the second auto ability. Just paying the cost to prime is not sufficient to trigger the ability. So just like with Anabella, you have to successfully prime. You have to actually set aside a card you're going to prime into and be in that locked in point of no return where the priming is going to happen. And at that point, you're triggering Vivian's auto ability to draw a card, which will then go on the stack after the whole priming process has been completed. So yeah, that's why she's here, and I have it yellow for the same reason as Anabella, which is that there's just a lot about priming and the wording used around priming that is still not fully ingrained in everybody. So just kind of further drawing attention that as people are experimenting with these newer priming cards, kind of what that means and doesn't mean. All right, Xiphos. Xiphos, it's got to when you do so. It's part of our cycle. This is the 5th of 6, so we're almost through this cycle of monsters. But yeah, when Xiphos deals damage to your opponent, put Xiphos into the break zone. When you do so, new auto ability, going on the stack. Choose one forward of cost 4 or less opponent controls, break it. Same as the rest. Serah. So her entry says Serah will not inflict damage on the opponent if the number of category 13 forward cards under the player's control is 2 or lower before this card's action ability is resolved. What's her action ability? Let's talk about it. So her action ability costs 0 CP. It says if you control 3 or more category 13 forwards, Serah deals your opponent 1 point of damage. You can only use this ability during your turn and only once per turn. On the one hand, they're pointing out the obvious here. They're saying if there's not 13 forwards, then 3 or more, then yeah, you're not gonna be able to point damage. But I don't blame them for doing it because there's been a bunch of these action abilities in the past where they've had a restriction on when you can use the ability. Then maybe you have to have a certain number of something or a certain character on the field. The one that springs to mind, because I'm old school, is I'm thinking about the old Opus 3 Ursula that has I forget the name of it. Her special is like Twin Fury or Twin something special. And it says you can only use this ability if you control a card named Yang, right? And the thing about those type of abilities where it says you can only use this if XYZ is that those restrictions are only on how to activate it in the first place. So for example, if you used that special ability of Ursula, once it's on the stack, if Yang leaves the field before the ability resolves, you still get to do it. It's still happened out there. We're not checking again whether Yang still exists when you go to resolve it. It's just a requirement on being able to initiate it in the first place. So since we've had a number of effects like that, I could see where somebody might accidentally think that, oh, you can't even use this unless you have 3 or more 13 forwards. But then once you've used it, now it's fair game. Now it's just going to resolve no matter what happens. And that's not the case, because this is not like, it's not a conditional auto ability where it's checking on both activation and on resolution. It's only checking on resolution. So you can use this when you have, well, I guess you wouldn't have 0, 13 forwards. You're going to have at least one. That's Serah. But you can use this if you have 1 13 forward or any number of 13 forwards, as long as Serah's on the field. You don't have to have 3, but it's only going to check whether you have 3 when it resolves. And then if you have 3, it deals a point of damage. And if you don't have 3, it doesn't deal a point of damage. So yeah, they're just drawing attention to the fact that you do need to have that 3 when it resolves. Otherwise, she ain't doing the thing. All right, this is our other trouble child. And I'm not going to dive too deep into her because I already did that. I did that in a video called Let's Talk About Lightning. I don't have my little graphic for shameless plug time, but just imagine it's here, / there. But yeah, I have a whole video where I just talked about nothing but lightning and the rules around what her crazy new effect does, or just like as new rules, things that came up because of it. So if you want to deep dive into just lightning, then go check that out. Or like pause this, open it up in a new tab, finish watching this, and then when you're done with this, go watch that. Whatever order you want to do it in. I ain't gonna tell you what to do if you watch my videos. But anyway, let's just talk about at least what her entries are here. First one says, it is possible to deploy a forward card with a different element to lightning. I just realized they have a typo. Sorry, distracting myself here. I literally cut and paste all of these from their entries. So anything that's like awkward about the wording or something here is because it's their wording. I just realized this first one, it says with a different element to lighting. So it's possible to deploy a forward card with a different element to lighting on the field. That's fun. Okay. I will say it properly though. It is possible to deploy a forward card with a different element to lightning on the field and form them into a party with lightning. Her effect, her auto ability says, when lightning attacks, you may play 1 category 13 forward of cost 6 or less from your hand onto the field, dull, forming a party with lightning, and attacking. You can play a forward of any element. At the end of the turn, return to its owner's hand. So the first entry here is just pointing out that yes, you can play a card that it doesn't have to be of the lightning element. And this is really important to point out because up until lightning and this new way of forming a party via her effect, the only way we've ever had to form a party is the built-in structured rules around forming a party that are in the game and declaring a party attack. And when declaring a party attack, one of the rules is that all the forwards in the party needs to be able to legally party with each other. And the rules around legally partying is that they need to share an element. Now, of course, there are other effects in the game like Light Noctis or 3CP Morrow that tell you, oh, okay, all your forwards can party attack regardless. Or I guess the other one would be the Setzer backup lets all your Final Fantasy VI forwards party together. But anyway, so because we have those restrictions that are so built in, they're very much drawing attention to here with this first entry for lightning that this is not following those rules for declaring a party attack. This is a different way of forming a party we've never had before, and it is breaking all those rules because it's different. And the first rule that it's breaking is that she can party with anybody. Lightning just wants to party. That's what this card's about. She just wants to party all the time. So yeah, any element. You can just pop it in there, and now it's forming a party, and they're doing the thing. Second entry says it's possible to deploy a forward that has the rule unable to form a party to the field and form them into a party with lightning. This one I find fascinating. And I find this fascinating because unless there's like something in the deep recesses of my brain that I have forgotten, there are no characters, especially for forwards in the game, that have a rule or an effect that says that they're unable to form a party. Like there's no effects in the game I can think of that make it so that something is unable to form a party. So this is either some like really forward thinking future proofing that they're doing, or they know that they've already created a card that hasn't been released yet in a future set that has something on it that says it's unable to form a party. And they're like, oh man, we better make sure that we cover our butts on that one. But yeah, they're pointing out that again, because this is not your standard way of forming a party and declaring a party attack, that if there was a forward that says it's unable to form a party, then it can still be played via Lightning's ability and will come in and form a party with her. Because Lightning's all about peer pressure is what I'm getting. She wants to party all the time and she's all about peer pressure. She's like, I don't care who you are. I don't care what you want to do or don't want to do. We are doing this right now. Get in, loser. We're going party attacking. They don't point out on here, what I find interesting is that she can also party with forwards that say they can't attack or block. There's that Vanille, that 2 CP 6k Earth Vanille. That the very first ability on her, it says Vanille cannot attack or block. And they have specifically answered on Twitter that you can absolutely play that Vanille party attacking with lightning from her effect, and that Vanille she'll attack with lightning, because we're getting around that restriction, which the restriction is not on attacking, as it turns out. That restriction is on declaring an attack with Vanille. It's the weirdest like legal loophole ever. But yeah, it's so you can also do that and have a forward that normally can't attack or block is suddenly attacking with lightning because of her peer pressure. And then the last bit here is also really important. It says auto abilities that trigger when forming a party and attacking will not trigger if a forward card is deployed using this card's auto ability. For example, if Opus 4 Chocobo is deployed using Lightning's ability, neither Lightning nor Chocobo will have 3,000 added to their power values. This is the one that catches people a lot, and it was like the biggest question when this card first got spoiled for people trying to theory craft with it, which is there are so many effects in the game that say when XYZ attacks or when a party you control attacks. And those triggers are triggered when you declare an attack. So they're not going to trigger here for two different reasons. If it was like Andoria, for example, says when a party you control attacks, draw one card, I think is what she says. So if you attack with this lightning and then with her effect throw in another forward, now they're party attacking, that will not trigger Andoria, because at the point where you declared the attack, it was not a party. It doesn't become a party till later, and when that forward comes in as a result of resolving Lightning's ability, you're not declaring an attack at that point. You're just adding her into an existing attack. She's getting dragged along. So you wouldn't trigger Andoria, and for that same reason, if the forward you're playing has an auto ability that says when this attacks, like for example the 2 CP Wind Knoll, it says when Knoll attacks, do the thing. If you play that Knoll off of Lightning's effect, his own auto ability is not going to trigger, because the trigger is actually declaring an attack with Knoll. It's not obvious because they don't phrase it that way on there. It doesn't say when Knoll declares an attack. It says when Knoll attacks. So there's this weird new distinction we have between when something attacks and it attacking. So the forward that enters from Lightning's ability is attacking, but it is not declaring an attack. Like I said, weird legal loophole. So yeah, don't get too excited about any of those auto abilities that say when such and such attacks do this. Not for Lightning, at least. Garnet. She's got a when you do so. Yeah. When she enters the field, you may dull 4 active characters you control. When you do so, choose one forward, put it at the bottom of its owner's deck. So yeah, after you dull the 4, new auto ability on the stack. The end. Thaliak. So another 12 here. The 12 just causing trouble all over these facts right now. The auto ability here, the entry says you are still able to draw one card even if the opponent was unable to select any forwards. All right, what's Thaliak's ability? He's got When Thaliak enters the field, if you control 4 or more Java 12, your opponent selects one forward they control, put it into the break zone, draw 1 card. Now, the reason they put this entry in here is because if you've been playing long enough, it's pretty ingrained what these rules are around choosing. I mentioned them earlier, where when an effect chooses one or more targets, you have like the binary thing here where it's when it tries to resolve, if all the targets that it had, all the things that it chose are invalid, then the whole thing self-cancels. And the other side is that when it goes to resolve, if at least one of the targets that it chose is still valid, it will resolve as much as possible. Now, those are specific rules around the word choose. Choose is like a magic word for that reason. We don't really have any other words that have that same specialness in terms of how things resolve for the most part. And so when we have effects like Thaliak, the thing is Thaliak doesn't choose. It's that thing I say during rules roundup sometimes where I go, if an effect doesn't say choose, it's not choosing. And Thaliak's not choosing either. His ability says your opponent selects one forward they control, put in the break zone, draw 1 card. So for the same reason why earlier in this video I mentioned that with those choose rules, whatever comes after the choose, if everything became invalid, the whole thing gets invalidated. It would be easy with Thaliak to think like, oh, well, what if they don't control any forwards, right? I play Thaliak to the field, this triggers, they don't have any forwards, they can't select one, so I don't get to draw a card, right? Turns out you do, because the drawing a card is not contingent on them putting one in the break zone or selecting a forward and putting it in the break zone, because this is not choose, so we're not bound by those special choose rules here. So if they don't have any when you play Thaliak, good for you, you'll draw a card still, as long as you keep the 4 or more job 12 on the field. And if they do have one, but then it goes to resolve and that forward's not on the field anymore by the time it resolves, that's fine too. You'll still draw your 1 as long as you had at least 4 job the 12. So yeah, just watch out for that. It's a little sneaky because we can get so ingrained on the choose rules that we then start trying to apply it to situations that are not choose. Sylvestre. All right. His entry says, you are still able to deploy a forward to the field from your hand, even if you did not search for a light element forward first. This is the same ruling as Fang from way back at the beginning of this video. So Sylvestre's effect says, when Sylvestre enters the field, you may search for 1 light forward and add it to your hand. Then you may play 1 forward of cost 3 or less from your hand onto the field. I won't go over the whole thing again because I already did it with Fang. But yeah, this is just that situation again where we have 2 different actions in the same effect. The first action is searching for a light forward and adding it to your hand. The second action is playing a forward of cost 3 or less from your hand onto the field. But the second action is not contingent on the first one happening. It doesn't say if you do so. It doesn't say when you do so. And it's not a choose effect, so we don't have the rest of this kind of attached and reliant on the first part of it. So yeah, if you don't search for a light forward or you search and you fail to find, you still get to play the forward onto the field. So again, good for you. Tidus. Okay, so his entry says, the source of the damage taken in the place of a card named Yuna card does not change. If Tidus has taken damage from Opus 19 Behemoth in Yuna's place, then he will be removed from the game. So his effect here says, he's got a field ability, says, if a card named Yuna forward you control is dealt damage, the damage is dealt to Tidus instead. We've had some of these effects before, but they're usually on like Cecil. I think we had it's also a water paladin, I think, that maybe does it. But it's typically a paladin thing where we are rerouting damage directly. Like we're not rerouting the whole ability, but or effect, but we are rerouting the damage over. So this entry is just pointing out the fact that even though the damage is being rerouted from Yuna over to Tidus, that the source of the damage is still whatever was hitting Yuna in the first place. So like the source of the damage is not Yuna. It'd be funny if it was, just from a humor perspective. Like Yuna's about to get hit, Tidus is standing right there, and Yuna just smacks him one instead. But no, the source of the damage is still the same. So that Opus 19 Behemoth, I believe it's one of the many Behemoths who have that phrasing on it. It says if the forward that received the damage is put from the field into the break zone this turn, remove it from the game instead. So they're just saying that will carry over to Tidus, even though Tidus wasn't the target of the summon. So he's taking the damage in Yuna's place, but now because he's the one being put into the break zone, he's going to be removed from the game instead. So the source of the damage is still Behemoth, which means that Behemoth's still going to get kind of all the credit and do whatever Behemoth would normally do, kind of as if it had chosen Tidus instead. Asura, Manusya of War. There's a lot of text here, and she's got a lot of text on her, but guess what? This is just a when you do so again. I'll read through her ability though, because it's just interesting, and just there's a lot going on here. Her and her 8 CP. It says, when Asura, Manusya of War enters the field, you may return one character other than Asura, Manusya of War you control to its owner's hand. When you do so, all the forwards other than Asura, Manusya of War lose 8,000 power until the end of the turn. Then the other auto ability doesn't matter here. So yeah, you choose a character, and then on resolution, you return it to your hand. That creates the when you do so, which goes on the stack, and then when that resolves, everything loses 8,000 power. So everything gets wiped out by so many arms. Yeah, so when you do so, it's just a very impressive one, let's say. Malboro, we've hit the end of the cycle. We're here at the end of the cycle of these monsters with when you do so effects. When Malboro deals damage to your opponent, put Malboro in the break zone. When you do so, new auto ability. All the forwards opponent controls lose 4,000 power until the end of the turn. Not as impressive as Asura, but also a lot cheaper and easier to pull off. So, yeah, when you do so, join your brethren there, Malboro. Yuna. Yuna, she's got a when you do so. We're doing this again. When Yuna enters the field or attacks, you may put the top 2 cards of your deck into the break zone. When you do so, choose one forward. It loses 5,000 power until the end of the turn. So after you've put the top 2 cards of your deck into the break zone, when you do so, adds a new auto ability onto the stack, and we do the thing. Lenna. Not a when you do so. So Lenna has an auto ability that selects from 2 actions, but it does state in the selection process here that if you control a card named Ferris, you actually select both actions, or well, up to both actions instead of just one. The possible actions here are your opponent selects one forward they control, put it into the break zone, and the other one is search for one job Warrior of Light and add it to your hand. Their entry here is saying you're still able to search for a job Warrior of Light card even if 2 effects were used and opponent did not select a forward card. It's the same exact ruling as Thaliak just a little bit ago. Same exact ruling. So they're just making sure it's pretty clear to people that this is not a choose effect. We're not following the rules that are based around choosing targets and needing to have targets. So if you selected or both actions and then when you go to resolve it, for whatever reason, they don't have a forward to select, you're not suddenly locked out of the search the way you would be if it was your opponent, or if it was a choosing a forward your opponent controls. So you don't have to feel bad about it in that situation. Rala's had a whole lot of questions since it got released, but let's talk about what they wanted to cover here. It says, if Rala acquires a rule that prevents it from being dulled by an opponent's summons or abilities, the replacement effect where the damage you take is reduced to 0 and Rala is dulled is still applied to it. I made this yellow just because it's kind of silly and kind of funny, and it's not I guess part of it's kind of obvious, but it's the discussion around it is not totally brain dead obvious like the when you do so stuff. So Rala's field ability says, if you receive damage while Rala is active, dull Rala, the damage becomes 0 instead. So it's a replacement effect. When you're going to receive damage, you replace the act or the action of taking damage with dulling Rala and making the damage be 0. They're just pointing out here that there are certain effects that can cause Rala to gain the ability or make an ongoing effect that makes it so that Rala can't be dulled by the opponent's summons or abilities. And they're just saying that you'd have to have a really weird roundabout logic for this to be like, oh, I'm using Serah's effect, which deals you a damage. And so because I dealt you a damage, that's my ability causing Rala to become dull, but Rala can't become dull by my abilities. So therefore Rala doesn't become dull. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out why they needed to point this out. But they were just like, hey. If it can't become dull by your opponent's summons or abilities, then this replacement effect activating or being, I don't know how to put it because it's not an auto ability, but happening is not due to your opponent's summons or abilities. Like in an argument, in like a verbal, logical way, sure, it's due to your opponent's actions or, their summons or abilities because they're causing this to happen. But in a rule sense, that is not what's causing Rala to dull. So Rala is still going to dull anyway, and we're still going to make the damage 0. So just kind of like no shenanigans is the way I interpret this one. This is just Square going, no shenanigans. That brings us to our final entry. Here we are at the end. Arden. His entry says, you do not take damage if Arden is removed from the game and not present on the field before his action ability is resolved. Okay, what is his action ability? We're talking about the second action ability, I should specify. Damage 5. He's got an action ability, it costs 0. It says, play Arden onto the field. When Arden enters the field, Arden deals you 1 point of damage. You can only use this ability during your main phase and if Arden is in the break zone. This is one of these rare action abilities that generates an auto ability. Because if we just read it again here, the action, when you resolve it, play Arden onto the field. When Arden enters the field. So it creates another auto ability. Right? It's built in here. When Arden enters the field, Arden deals you 1 point of damage. Now, just like when we have when you do so's, that does make this this auto ability would be put on the stack. Though, unlike the when you do so's, they did not feel the need to point that out. I don't know why, but creates an auto ability that's when Arden enters the field, Arden deals you 1 point of damage. That goes on the stack. But what they're saying here is, if for some reason you use this action ability, and then when it goes to resolve, Arden doesn't actually get played onto the field, they're saying that the auto ability here, the when Arden enters the field, it doesn't trigger and you don't take a point of damage. What's the situation in which this would happen? Well, it's a weird one, but let's say that we activate the action ability, and then your opponent, before this resolves, so it's on the stack, they cast Mist Dragon to remove your break zone. And for some reason, you just go, okay, and everything gets removed, including Arden. Then when Arden goes to resolve, because Arden's not in the break zone anymore, he doesn't get played to the field. Because he doesn't get played to the field, that the trigger event of when Arden enters the field doesn't happen, and so you don't get dealt a point of damage. Now, the reason why this is silly is because since this is a 0 cost ability, and because it doesn't have a restriction on you can only use it once per turn, if you use the Arden ability, and they respond by doing Mist Dragon, you can just respond by using the Arden ability again. And then in that case, you basically, Arden can always win stack chicken because he can always just use the ability again and keep getting to the top of the stack. For clarity, what would happen is that after he enters the field, you would take the point of damage, and then when you eventually work your way down to the other instances of Arden, you're not going to keep taking damage because those ones will keep looking for Arden in the break zone, and Arden's not in the break zone anymore, and so those ones just won't resolve. They also won't deal damage for the same reason as why they listed this entry down here for Arden. So yeah, they're just pointing out that if for some reason, or maybe you were just using the ability for lulls and then you remove Arden yourself, I don't know, you Q-Sith it or something. But yeah, so they're just making sure you know that, yeah, if he's doesn't actually get played, you don't take a point of damage. How nice of him. That's our final FAQ entry. We're back to the beginning. 38 cards down, a whole lot of when you do so's along the way, and some weirdness with lightning and Ignis and such. But yeah, that's everything. It's every FAQ entry for Opus 26. As I speak, I'm clocking in almost an hour and 40 minutes, which is by far the longest video I've ever done. My voice is a little bit sore, so let's start wrapping things up here. Thank you for watching, especially if you've been watching this far. If you want to reach out to me for anything, you can find me here on YouTube, where I'm youtube.com/@JudgeJared. Feel free to like this video. Feel free to subscribe to me if you haven't already. Go like other videos, comment on this video, comment on other videos. Be involved. I like interaction. It's good stuff. On Facebook, you can find me at facebook.com/Judge Jared. You can like my page there and follow all the things going on there. On Twitter, I am at Judge Jared FFTCG if you want to follow me there as well and just see the kind of random tweets that I do once in a while. I'm not super active there other than like asking questions to Hobby Japan, but you can ask me questions if you want or just see what nonsense I'm up to. And then on Discord, my username is Judge Jared, and my DMs are open, at least until somebody makes me regret that. And so if you have any rules questions, you can reach out to me there. And yeah, so you can follow me in all those places or some subsection of those places. But hey, follow me everywhere. I mean, don't stalk me, but follow me everywhere. Yeah, thanks for watching. I appreciate all of you out there watching and being involved and everything. So, yeah, that's all I got. That's all I got for today. All 1 hour and 40 minutes of it. Hope you enjoyed it. So, if you have any thoughts about this, going over the facts here, let me know. If you liked what I did, if you didn't like what I did, if you think there's certain things I should do more of or less in the process here, just give me your feedback. This only comes around once per set, but I'm hoping to keep this up when new sets come out, just to make sure to go over everything. But yeah, let's leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Judge Jared, and until next time, court is adjourned.